She didn't scream. She didn't run. She just stood there while brown liquid dripped from her natural hair down her uniform, pooling on the marble floor of Blackwood Academy's main hallway, as 300 students watched, laughed, and recorded every second for the internet. Amara Brooks had survived 3 years of this. 3 years of being the joke, the target, the girl they broke for sport. But today was different. Because today a man walked through that crowd, and every single person who was laughing went completely silent. Stay with me until the end. Like, comment, and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The morning Amara Brooks' life changed forever started the same way every other morning at Blackwood Academy started, with her invisible. That was the deal she'd made with herself 3 years ago, when the scholarship letter arrived and her mother cried at the kitchen table of their 2-bedroom apartment in the East Side, clutching the envelope like it was a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Amara had stood in the doorway watching her mother's shoulders shake and made a silent, practical promise to herself. Keep your head down, do the work, don't give them anything to use against you. She broke that promise the moment she walked through Blackwood's iron gates. Not because she was reckless, not because she was naive, but because no amount of preparation could have readied a 16-year-old girl from a public housing district for the sheer, deliberate cruelty of children who had never once been told no. Now she was 19, a junior, and the cruelty hadn't faded. It had evolved the way all sophisticated things do when given enough time and resources. She was walking fast that Tuesday morning, the kind of fast that looks purposeful but is really just survival instinct dressed up as confidence. Her backpack was heavy. It always was, because Amara carried her textbooks like armor, like the weight of them against her spine was proof that she belonged somewhere, even if not here. The hallway was loud. It was always loud before first period at Blackwood, lockers slamming, designer sneakers squeaking on marble that cost more per square foot than Amara's mother paid in monthly rent. Laughter. That particular high-pitched laughter of teenagers who've never experienced a consequence, bouncing off columns that had stood since 1887, when Blackwood Academy was founded by men whose portraits still hung in oil and gold frames above the main staircase. Amara kept her eyes on the floor ahead of her. She had learned, through trial and brutal error, that eye contact was an invitation. She almost made it, 40 feet, 30, 20. The corridor was narrowing toward the East Wing staircase, and she could see the door to the science building from where she was, and she was almost clear of the worst of them. "Hey, Brooks!" She didn't stop. She'd learned not to stop. "Aw, she didn't hear me." Preston Hale's voice carried the effortless projection of someone raised in rooms with high ceilings, someone who had never once needed to raise his voice to be obeyed. Somebody want to get her attention? She heard the laughter shift, felt it more than heard it. Actually, a subtle change in the acoustic texture of the hallway, like the moment before a storm when the pressure drops and every bird goes quiet. Her hand tightened around the strap of her backpack. "Keep walking, 20 feet to the door, 18. The cup hit the back of her head. It wasn't accidental. Nothing Preston Hale did was accidental. The cup, one of those oversized premium chocolate drinks from the cafe kiosk near the front entrance, the kind that cost $11 and came with a glossy cardboard sleeve, had been aimed with the practiced precision of someone who'd done something like this before. It burst on impact. Cold, dark liquid cascaded down the back of her neck, soaked through her collar, ran down her spine inside her shirt in a sensation so startlingly cold and humiliating that her whole body locked up. The hallway erupted, not in horror, in delight. She heard the phones come out, that soft, collective rustle of 300 hands reaching for devices, the click and tap of cameras orienting, the unmistakable sound of a live stream starting. Someone nearby actually said, out loud, without shame, "Oh my God, this is going to get so many views." Amara stood still. The liquid was still dripping, off the ends of her natural hair, which she'd spent 45 minutes on that morning because she had a presentation in Dr. Ellison's biology seminar, and she'd wanted, stupidly, she thought now, to look the part. Down her cheek, off the point of her jaw, soaking into the collar of the white uniform blouse that the academy required and that she hand-washed every Sunday night because she only had 2. She didn't cry. She had made that promise 2 years ago. They don't get your tears. Whatever they take, they don't get that. Preston moved into her peripheral vision. He was tall, 6'2", broad through the shoulders, the kind of build that came from private coaching and a personal trainer since age 12. His hair was the color of old money, which is to say, a very specific shade of blonde that photographed well. He was grinning, not a cruel grin, which would have been easier to process, a bored one. The grin of someone who had never once had to work for anything and found entertainment wherever he could manufacture it. "You've got something?" He gestured vaguely at her head. "Kind of everywhere, actually." His friends laughed. There were 4 of them arranged behind him in the loose formation of young men who have appointed a leader and follow without question. One of them, Marcus, who had never in 3 years directed a single word at Amara independently, but who laughed louder than anyone at whatever Preston did, was holding his phone at chest height, streaming. Amara turned to look at Preston Hale. She looked at him the way you look at a problem you are trying to solve. Slowly, analytically, without flinching and without giving him the emotional response he was there to collect. His grin faltered. Just slightly, just for a fraction of a second, just enough for her to notice. She said nothing. Nothing to say? He tilted his head. 3 years and still no comeback. That's actually kind of impressive in its own way, Brooks. Like, you've really committed to the bit. What bit is that? She said. Her voice came out quieter than she intended, but it came out steady, and she held on to that. The bit where you pretend you belong here. He wasn't cruel when he said it. That was the worst part. He was matter of fact. Genuinely puzzled, almost. As if it had never once occurred to him that her presence at Blackwood could be anything other than a curiosity. No offense. You just poured a drink on my head. That was funny, you have to admit. Preston. One of the other boys, James, touched his arm, not warning him off. That would have required more spine than James possessed, just redirecting. Come on, we're going to be late. Preston glanced back at his phone-holding friend. The live stream was still running. He had an audience, and he knew it, and he made the calculation that all cowards with platforms make. One more thing, just one, for the camera. He opened his mouth. The hallway went silent. Not the silence of 300 teenagers holding their breath. The silence of 300 teenagers who have just realized simultaneously that someone new has entered the space, someone whose presence rearranged the molecular weight of the air. Amara heard the footsteps first. Not fast, not threatening, just measured, unhurried, the specific cadence of someone who has never once in their life needed to rush toward anything because everything waits for them. The sound of leather-soled shoes on marble, each step deliberate, each step landing with a quiet authority that made the crowd part without being asked. She turned. He was not what you'd expect, which, she realized later, was exactly the point. Damian Volkov was perhaps 52, 53, medium height, which surprised her. She'd have guessed from the way the crowd was reacting that he'd be enormous, physically overwhelming. But he wasn't. He was lean, dark suit, very good wool, the kind of good that doesn't announce itself. Silver at his temples. A face that had been handsome once and was now something more interesting. Lived in, carved by decades of decisions she could not imagine. With eyes that were a shade of gray that didn't so much reflect light as absorb it. He was walking toward her. Not toward Preston. Not toward the crowd. Toward her. She noticed, in the stunned peripheral way you notice things when your nervous system is already overwhelmed, that 2 men in dark jackets had materialized at the edges of the crowd and were standing very still in the way that people stand when they are professionally trained to stand still and watch exits. Damian Volkov stopped approximately 3 feet from Amara Brooks. He looked at her. Not at the chocolate soaking her collar, not at her hair, not at the crowd around them. He looked at her face, her eyes. The way you look at someone when you are taking an actual inventory of who they are. Then he reached up, slowly, and removed his overcoat. Dark charcoal, silk-lined, probably cost more than her mother made in 6 months. He draped it over Amara's shoulders with the quiet, unhurried care of someone performing an act that needed no audience, even though it had 300 of them. The weight of it settled around her like something had been decided. He turned then, just his head. He looked at Preston Hale. Preston Hale, who had humiliated students for sport since the 9th grade, whose father sat on the school's board of directors, who had 17,000 followers on the live stream platform and had never once faced a consequence, Preston Hale dropped his gaze to the floor. Damien's voice was quiet. That was what Amara would remember later, how quiet it was, how completely unnecessary volume was to a man like him. Who touched her first? Nobody spoke. The hallway, which had been vibrating with laughter 90 seconds ago, was absolutely, completely silent. Marcus's phone tilted down without him seeming to realize he'd done it. James, who had been about to say something, appeared to have forgotten how language worked. Preston's jaw moved once, like he was trying to locate words that had simply evacuated him. Damien waited. He was, Amara understood, a man who was comfortable with silence in a way that made other people profoundly uncomfortable with it. Preston started. Damien held up one hand. One finger, actually. An infinitesimal gesture. Preston stopped speaking as if a switch had been thrown. I didn't ask if you had something to say. Damien's gray eyes moved over the group the way you scan a document for relevant information, deliberately, without hurry, missing nothing. I asked who touched her first. Nobody answered. That's all right, Damien said. And then something strange happened. He almost smiled. Not warmly, the way a glacier almost has an edge. I already know. He turned back to Amara. Something shifted in his expression when he looked at her. Not pity. She was certain of that, and she was grateful for it, because pity was the thing she'd been swimming in for 3 years, and she was very tired of the taste of it. It was something more like recognition, like he was looking at someone he understood. Are you hurt? He said. No, she said. She was not sure if this was true. She said it anyway. He nodded once, as if she had passed some test she hadn't known she was taking. Good. He glanced at the overcoat around her shoulders. Keep it. The dry cleaning is not your problem. He stepped back. One of the men at the edge of the crowd moved forward. She understood now that he was an aide or an assistant or something more than both, and exchanged a quiet word with Damien. Damien's eyes moved to the phone in Marcus's hand. Marcus shoved it into his pocket so fast he nearly dropped it. One more thing, Damien said. He wasn't speaking to anyone in particular. He was speaking to the hallway, to all of it. His voice carried without effort, reaching every corner without him raising it a single decibel. What I saw here today, I want you all to understand something. A pause. The kind of pause that people remember. There are consequences for everything, even the things you think no one is paying attention to. His eyes drifted back to Preston and rested there. Especially those. He walked away through the crowd, which moved aside for him the way water moves from the prow of a ship. Not rushed, not dramatic, just inevitable. Amara stood in the hallway wearing a dead man's coat, or a powerful man's coat, which she was beginning to understand might be the same thing, with chocolate drying in her hair and her hands shaking slightly inside the oversized sleeves. And she watched Damien Volkov leave, and she did not know yet what he was, or what had just happened, or what it meant. She would find out. But first, the crowd, which was no longer laughing, which was no longer streaming. 300 teenagers stood in absolute bewildered quiet, phones lowered, eyes moving between Amara and the direction the man had gone. Preston Hale was staring at the floor. The color had left his face entirely, leaving him looking younger than she'd ever seen him. Just a boy, suddenly, stripped of the particular confidence that inherited wealth provides. Just a boy who had, for one fractured second, looked at something genuinely unfamiliar to him. Fear. Amara pulled the coat closer around her shoulders. She met Preston's eyes. She held them. 3 seconds, 4, 5. He looked away first. She walked to the science building door, pushed it open, and didn't look back. Her hands didn't stop shaking until she reached the second-floor landing, where she stopped, pressed her back against the wall, and exhaled a breath that felt like it had been compressed inside her chest for 3 years. The coat smelled of cedar and cold air and something unnameable, and it was very warm, and she stood there in it for a long moment, eyes on the ceiling, jaw tight, refusing to let herself process what had just happened in the hallway below. Not yet. She had a presentation in 40 minutes. She had a lab report due at noon. She had a life she'd been building here, brick by solitary brick, in the hostile silence of this institution, and she was not going to let one strange, unreadable encounter, however significant it felt, derail the careful architecture of her survival. But that evening, when the day was done and she was sitting alone in the library, while the sky outside went from gray to dark, her phone buzzed with a message from a number she didn't recognize. "Ms. Brooks, if you're willing, I'd like to speak with you tomorrow. There are things happening at this school that you deserve to know." DV. She stared at the message for a long time. She thought about 3 years of silence. 3 years of keeping her head down and her grades up and her tears to herself while the people around her moved through this place like gods, untouchable and unaccountable, burning everything they touched and walking away clean. She thought about her mother at the kitchen table, clutching an envelope. She thought about the way the hallway had gone quiet. She typed back, "What time?" The reply came in under 10 seconds. 7 a.m. The cafe on Harmon Street. "I'll be the one who doesn't belong there either." Amara read the last line twice. She set her phone down on the library table. Outside, the first autumn rain had started, streaking the tall windows in long, dark lines. For the first time in 3 years, she didn't feel like the only person in the city who understood what it meant to be looked through. She didn't sleep much that night. She lay in her narrow bed in the Academy's scholarship dormitory, a room half the size of the ones on the other floors, in a wing that had been added in 1974 and showed it. And she stared at the water stain on the ceiling and tried to think logically about what she knew. Damian Volkov. She'd Googled the name the moment she was alone, and the results had come back in a cascade that she'd had to scroll through slowly to believe. A businessman, technically. Imports and exports, technically. The kind of man who appeared in the backgrounds of photographs, never centered, never speaking to the camera, always watching from some edge or other. The kind of man whose company name appeared in financial news pieces alongside words like alleged and rumored and sources close to. The kind of man about whom it was very difficult to find anything concrete, which was, she understood from her hours of reading research methodology, itself a kind of information. His legal name was Damian Alexei Volkov, born in Odessa, emigrated at 17, built something, it was very unclear what exactly, by 30. Was now whatever he was at 52 or 53. What he was had made an entire hallway of wealthy, entitled teenagers go silent like a switched-off current. What he was had sent her a message at 9:30 at night and said tomorrow at 7 with the confidence of someone who does not consider the possibility of being declined. Amara closed her eyes. She thought, this is either the best thing that has ever happened to you, or it is the beginning of something you have absolutely no framework for. She thought, you have been surviving this school for 3 years on nothing but your own stubbornness and a chemistry textbook. You are 19 years old and exhausted, and you have been alone in this fight longer than any person should be alone in anything. She thought, he looked at you like you were a person. She turned onto her side, pulled the thin dormitory blanket up to her chin, and made herself breathe steadily. Somewhere on the other side of the city, in whatever world Damian Volkov actually inhabited, something was already in motion. She couldn't see it yet. She didn't know its shape, but she had spent 3 years training herself to recognize the particular silence that comes just before something changes. And the city outside her window was very, very quiet. The cafe on Harmon Street was the kind of place that had been old for so long it had come around again to being interesting. Cracked black and white tile floors, a counter with 8 stools, most of them uneven, coffee that came in one size and cost $2 and tasted like it had been brewing since the previous administration. It was 6:58 in the morning when Amara pushed through the glass door, and the small bell above it announced her arrival to the 3 people inside. The man behind the counter, an elderly woman in a yellow raincoat bent over a crossword, and Damian Volkov, sitting in the back corner booth with a cup of coffee he hadn't touched, and his eyes already on the door. He looked different without the crowd around him. Smaller, in the way that very controlled people sometimes look smaller when there's no chaos to contrast them against. But his eyes were the same, that particular gray that seemed to operate independently of whatever expression the rest of his face was making, taking inventory of everything without advertising that it was doing so. He waited until she'd sat down across from him before speaking. "You came," he said. "You said 7. A lot of people say they'll be somewhere at 7. I'm not a lot of people." She said it without thinking, and then wondered if it sounded defensive, and then decided she didn't care. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. An acknowledgement. He pushed the second coffee cup. She hadn't noticed it, sitting there waiting, across the table toward her. She looked at it, looked at him. "It's coffee," he said, "not a contract." She picked it up, drank. It was strong and slightly bitter, and exactly what she needed. "How do you know who I am?" she said. "I've known who you are for approximately 6 weeks." He said it the way someone says 2 + 2 = 4. A fact. An unloaded one he seemed to want her to understand. "I have business interests that intersect with several of the families whose children attend Blackwood. During the course of investigating those interests, your name appeared in a context that concerned me." "What context?" He looked at her steadily. "How familiar are you with the Academy's scholarship endowment?" She set the cup down. "It's administered by the board, renewable annually based on academic performance and what they call community contribution." She put the last 2 words in audible quotation marks. "Why?" "Because 3 months ago, someone on that board moved to have your scholarship flagged for non-renewal." He watched her face. "On the grounds of," and I'm quoting the minutes here, "social disruption and failure to contribute positively to the Academy's culture." The cafe noise continued around them. The hiss of the coffee machine, the scratch of the old woman's pen, rain still tapping the windows. Amara sat very still. "The motion didn't pass," Damien said. 2 board members voted against it, but it was filed. It's in the record. And the person who filed it was Richard Hale, Preston's father. She'd known the name for 3 years the way you know the name of a weather system, as the source of conditions you live under but have no control over. Richard Hale, board chairman, property developer. His photograph was in the main entrance hall in a row of notable donors. His smile, the specific smile of a man who has confused being thanked with being liked. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Because you should know what you're dealing with." He picked up his coffee for the first time, drank, set it back down. "And because Richard Hale is significantly more dangerous than his son. I know Preston Hale is a bully, with an audience. Preston Hale is a symptom." He said it without contempt, which was somehow more damning. His father is the infrastructure. She looked at him across the table. Outside, a bus went past, throwing a wave of water against the base of the window. She thought about what she was doing, sitting across from a man whose name appeared in search results next to the word alleged, more times than she'd cared to count. And she thought about the fact that she was 19 years old and nobody except her mother had ever done anything on her behalf that didn't cost her something first. "What do you want from me?" she said. He didn't hesitate. "Nothing." "Everyone wants something?" "Then call it a correction." He folded his hands on the table. They were the hands of someone who had worked with them once before whatever he had become. "What happened in that hallway yesterday was something I happened to witness. I don't walk past certain things. Because of your moral code." She couldn't keep the edge entirely out of it. He met her eyes without flinching. "Because I was 11 years old when a group of older boys broke 3 of my fingers for the contents of my school bag, and nobody walked past to stop it." A pause. "So no, not a moral code, a specific memory." She said nothing. Outside, the rain thickened. "I'm going to keep looking into what's happening at Blackwood," he said. "I'd like you to know that, and I'd like you to be careful. Not afraid. Careful. There's a difference, and I think you already know that." She thought about it. About him. About the 11-year-old boy with broken fingers who had become this, whatever this was. About her mother's voice on the phone last Sunday, asking how things were going, and Amara saying fine the way she always said fine because the truth of it would have destroyed her mother and accomplished nothing. "I have a chemistry seminar at 8:30, she said. "Then you should go." She stood. She picked up the coffee and drank the last of it. She put the cup down and looked at him one more time. "Mr. Volkov. Damien. The people you're looking into." She chose her words the way she chose variables in an equation, precisely, deliberately. "How much do you already know?" He looked at her for a long moment. "More than they're comfortable with," he said. "Less than I intend to." She nodded once, the way she nodded when a hypothesis checked out. Then she walked out of the cafe into the cold morning rain without looking back, because she had learned, very young, that looking back is only useful if you have somewhere to retreat to. She didn't. She never had. So she walked forward. The week that followed was the strangest of Amar's 3 years at Blackwood, and that was a field with considerable competition. Nothing dramatic happened, not on the surface. Preston Hale did not pour anything on her. His friends, who had spent 3 years treating her presence as an invitation for ambient cruelty, now appeared to be suffering from a collective and sudden onset inability to see her. She walked past them in the hallway, and they looked at their phones, at the ceiling, at each other, anywhere but at her. Marcus, who had been running the live stream the day before, dropped his tray in the cafeteria on Wednesday and did not make eye contact with anyone for the rest of the lunch period. Teachers inexplicably started calling on her more. Small things. The kind of small things that are only noticeable if you've spent 3 years cataloging what it feels like when nobody calls on you. Amara cataloged all of it. She was, at her core, a scientist, which meant she gathered data before drawing conclusions. And right now the data said that something had shifted in the power dynamics of Blackwood Academy, and the cause was a 50-something man in a charcoal coat who had asked one quiet question and left. On Thursday, Dr. Ellison pulled her aside after the biology seminar. Dr. Ellison was 61, silver-haired, the kind of teacher who had stayed at Blackwood long past the point where her qualifications could have taken her somewhere better, and Amara had never been sure if that was devotion or defeat. "Your mitochondrial research proposal," Dr. Ellison said, closing the classroom door. "I submitted it to the Regional Science Foundation 3 weeks ago. I heard back this morning." Amara went still. She'd given Dr. Ellison that proposal in September, carefully, without expectation. The way you hand something fragile to someone and try not to watch too hard to see if they drop it. They want to advance it to the second review stage. Dr. Ellison's voice was carefully calibrated, professional, not effusive, which was exactly the right register for the information she was delivering. "That means a panel evaluation in December. If it passes, it means a funded fellowship." "A fellowship," Amara said. The word felt like a foreign language she was translating in real time. "At the Harmon Institute. I know what the Harmon Institute is." She said it before she could stop herself, and then, yes, I know it." "Don't apologize for knowing things." Dr. Ellison looked at her over the rim of her glasses with something that had been building for a while, Amara suspected, and had finally found its moment. "You should know. I had to advocate specifically for this submission. There was a procedural question raised about whether scholarship students' submissions could be put forward under the school's name." "Who raised it?" Dr. Ellison pressed her lips together briefly. "The kind of brief that means I know exactly and I'm choosing how much to tell you. It was resolved. That's what matters." But Amara already knew, with the particular bone certainty of someone who has spent 3 years learning to read the architecture of a system that was designed to exclude her, exactly whose procedural question it had been. "Thank you," she said, "for advocating." "Don't thank me. Defend your research in December." Dr. Ellison held the classroom door open. "And Amara, whatever is happening around this school right now, whatever that noise is, stay out of it. Do your work. That's the only thing that lasts." Amara nodded and walked out into the hallway and spent the next 3 hours turning the phrase "whatever that noise is" over in her mind like a stone she'd found on a beach. Small, unremarkable on the surface, but too heavy for its size. That evening her phone buzzed. A different number this time, but she recognized the rhythm of the message, the economy of it, the absence of social lubrication. "There's a meeting tonight. Board members and 3 external parties at the Harrington Club. I thought you should know it's happening. You don't need to do anything with this information. DV." She stared at the message, typed back, "Why are you telling me things I don't need to do anything with?" The reply came after a pause longer than the previous ones. "Because for 3 years, nobody has told you anything at all. I'm correcting that." She set the phone down on her desk, looked at her chemistry notes, looked at the water-stained ceiling. Then she picked the phone back up and typed, "What's happening at the meeting?" His answer was 3 sentences. She read them twice. Then she put the phone face down on the desk and sat with the information for a long time, because the information was the kind that changes the shape of everything you thought you understood. And that kind of information needs a moment before you can carry it properly. What Damien Volkov had told her was this. Richard Hale and two other board members, Terrence Calloway and Diane Forsyth, had been, for at least 7 years, routing scholarship endowment funds through a series of subsidiary accounts. Not all of the endowment. Enough that the fund remained functional, enough that the scholarships kept being awarded, but a significant portion, close to 40% of annual contributions, had been redirecting to a holding company registered in Delaware that existed on paper only. The Delaware company existed for the purpose of cycling funds into a separate real estate development entity that Richard Hale had controlling interest in. They had been stealing from the scholarship fund. They had been stealing for 7 years from the fund that paid for Amara's education, from the fund that made it possible for students like her to walk through Blackwood's iron gates at all. And when those students arrived and made the system uncomfortable, Richard Hale moved to flag their scholarships for non-renewal. She sat with that for a long time. She thought about all the students who'd passed through Blackwood on scholarships in the past 7 years. Some of them had made it. Some of them had not. Had left quietly, had been counseled out, had found their funding suddenly uncertain in ways the administration explained as procedural, as budgetary, as regrettable. She thought about a girl named Destiny, 2 years ahead of her, who'd had her scholarship revoked in junior year for what the board called academic inconsistency, after she'd filed a complaint about classroom discrimination. Destiny had gone home. Amara had never heard from her again. She picked up her phone, typed, "How solid is the evidence?" Damien, "Solid enough that I've been sitting on it for 4 weeks waiting for the right moment." Her, "What's the right moment?" A pause. Then, "When the people involved have no room to maneuver. Right now they have room. Not for much longer." She put the phone down again. She was still sitting at her desk at 11:30 that night when the knock came at her door. She opened it to find Preston Hale standing in the scholarship dormitory hallway, which he had absolutely no business being in, which was a separate wing from the main student residences, which required a key card his status should not have granted him. He was wearing a jacket over a t-shirt, and he looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days, which was so unlike his usual presentation that it took her a half-second to be sure it was him. "How did you get in here?" she said. "Marcus's key card. His girlfriend lives on the 2nd floor." He glanced down the hallway. Empty. "Can I need to talk to you. You've had 3 years to talk to me." "I know." He said it without deflection, which was not something she'd witnessed from him before. It was such an unfamiliar frequency that it made her cautious, because genuineness in people who have been reliably cruel is either growth or manipulation, and she had no data yet for which this was. 5 minutes. That's all. She didn't step back from the door. Talk from there. He ran a hand through his hair, that money-colored hair, now looking less curated than usual. "My father got a call tonight. From someone. He didn't tell me who, but I heard enough of it to know it wasn't normal." He looked at her. "He was scared, Amara. I have never in my life seen my father scared of anything. And after the call he came to find me, and he looked at me like..." He stopped, worked his jaw. "He asked me what I'd done to you specifically. And when I told him about Tuesday, about the hallway, he said a name." She waited. "He said Volkov," Preston said, and then he said I had no idea what I'd started." The hallway was very quiet. Somewhere in the building, a radiator knocked and settled. "Preston," she said carefully, "what exactly are you asking me?" "I'm asking what that man is to you." He looked at her straight on, and for the first time in 3 years she saw something in Preston Hale's face that wasn't performance. It was naked and ugly and real, fear dressed up as concern for her, because it was easier to wear concern than to wear fear. "Because he's no one to me," she said. "He saw something happen in a hallway and he acted on it, that's all." "That is not all." Preston's voice dropped. "My father has been on the phone all night. He called Calloway. He called Forsyth. Something is happening, Amara, and it's because of you, and I think you need to know that my father doesn't..." He stopped again. Something crossed his face that she could not entirely read. "He doesn't handle things the normal way, when things threaten him." She looked at him for a long time. The fluorescent light in the hallway was the bad kind, the kind that makes everyone look sick. And in it, Preston Hale looked stripped down to something she hadn't expected to find underneath. A young man who had been born into a system that rewarded cruelty, who had never once been required to examine that, and who was now, for the first time, standing outside it and looking back at the shape of what he'd participated in. She didn't feel sorry for him. She didn't have the bandwidth for that, but she filed the information. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "Amara, go home, Preston." She closed the door. She stood on the other side of it with her back to the wood and her eyes on the opposite wall, and she breathed slowly, in through the nose, out through the mouth, the way she'd taught herself to breathe when things were happening faster than her mind could fully process. Then she picked up her phone and called Damien Volkov. He answered on the second ring, which told her he wasn't sleeping. "Ms. Brooks?" "Preston Hale just came to my dormitory." She kept her voice even. "He says his father got a phone call tonight. He says Richard Hale knows your name, and he says Richard Hale doesn't handle threats the normal way." She paused. "I need you to tell me what I'm actually in the middle of." A silence. Not the silence of someone thinking of what to say. The silence of someone deciding how much of the truth to carry across. "You're not in the middle of anything," he said. "Stop." Her voice came out harder than she'd intended, and she let it be hard because she was done with carefully calibrated everything, and it was nearly midnight and Preston Hale had just been in her hallway. "I am 19 years old. I have been navigating this institution alone for 3 years. I am not fragile and I am not naive. And if you treat me like either of those things, I will hang up and call my mother, and in the morning I will walk into the administration building and tell them everything I know, and that will end whatever you're building before it's finished." She breathed. "So, tell me what I'm in the middle of." Another silence, shorter this time. "Sit down," Damien said. "I'm already sitting." "Good." She heard him exhale. "What I'm about to tell you is going to make tomorrow feel different than today felt. I want you to be ready for that." "I've been ready," she said. "I've been ready for 3 years." He began to talk. And the night outside her narrow dormitory window was still and dark, and the city below it was quiet. And somewhere across that city, Richard Hale was on the phone with men whose names she didn't yet know, and the machinery of something very large was beginning, on both sides, to move. And Amara Brooks sat in her narrow room with her phone pressed to her ear, and listened and understood for the first time that the hallway on Tuesday had not been an ending. It had been the first move in a game that had already been in progress for years, and she had just been told, at 11:47 on a Thursday night, that whether she wanted to be or not, she was already in it. What Damien told her that night took 41 minutes. She knew because she watched the clock on her dormitory wall without meaning to, the way you track small, measurable things when the large, unmeasurable things are coming at you too fast. 41 minutes. The radiator knocked twice. A door somewhere down the hall opened and closed. The city outside her window made its low, continuous noise, indifferent to the fact that the architecture of everything Amara thought she understood was being quietly, methodically dismantled by a man's voice in her ear. He told her about this Delaware holding company. He told her about the subsidiary accounts, the redirected endowment funds, the 7 years of careful financial maneuvering that had siphoned somewhere between $2 and $3 million from scholarship contributions into a real estate development entity that existed primarily to make Richard Hale wealthier than he already was. He told her about Callaway and Forsyth, who were not passive participants but active architects, whose signatures appeared on documents they had taken considerable care to bury. He told her about 2 former scholarship students whose non-renewals, he had reason to believe, were not academic decisions but strategic ones. Students who had become inconvenient, who had asked questions, who had filed complaints that disappeared into the administrative apparatus of Blackwood Academy without leaving a mark. He told her, last, about a federal investigator named Carla Reyes, with whom he had been in contact for 11 days. When he finished, Amara sat in the dark of her room and said nothing for long enough that he said, "Are you still there?" "I'm here." Her voice sounded strange to her, compressed. 11 days. "Yes." "You've been talking to a federal investigator for 11 days. Carla Reyes has been building a financial crimes case for considerably longer than that. I've been providing documentation that accelerates her timeline. And you're telling me this now because Richard Hale got a phone call tonight that suggests someone in my circle has been less discreet than I required them to be." His voice was even, but she was learning to hear the things underneath the evenness. He knows someone is moving against him. He doesn't know what I have, but he's going to start making preemptive moves, and some of those moves may involve you. She absorbed this. Why me? I'm a student. I have nothing to do with his finances. You have everything to do with his exposure. A pause. You're the most visible connection between what happened in that hallway and my involvement with this school. If he can discredit you, if he can manufacture a reason to have you removed from Blackwood before this investigation reaches its conclusion, he eliminates the human element of this story. Financial crimes are abstract. A 19-year-old scholarship student who was publicly humiliated while the board chairman stole from her fund is not abstract. Bont sits. She pressed her palm flat against the surface of her desk, felt the cold of it. So I'm a liability, she said. You're leverage, he said. There's a difference. Leverage can be protected. She thought about what Dr. Ellison had said. Stay out of it. Do your work. That's the only thing that lasts. She thought about the scholarship endowment flag that had been filed and not passed. She thought about Destiny, whose name she hadn't spoken aloud in 2 years, and about the administrative language of regrettable and budgetary and procedural. Okay, she said. Okay, he repeated, and she could hear that he'd expected more resistance, which she filed away as information about how he operated. What do I do? You go to class tomorrow. You don't change your routine by a single degree. You act as though this conversation never happened. And if anyone from the administration, any board member, any parent, approaches you about anything outside of academic matters, you contact me immediately. And if Preston Hale talks to me again? A brief silence. What did your instinct tell you about that conversation? She thought about Preston's face in the bad fluorescent light, the stripped-down quality of it, that he was genuinely frightened, and that he doesn't have his father's talent for hiding it. Then your instinct is well calibrated. He paused. Preston is not the threat. He's the warning system. Remember that. She said goodnight and ended the call, and sat in the dark for another 20 minutes before she lay down on her bed, fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling and did not sleep. The next 3 days were the longest of her life, and they looked completely normal from the outside. She went to class. She ate in the cafeteria, alone as always, working through problem sets with her headphones in and her back to the wall. She ran her usual Tuesday and Thursday track route around the academy's east grounds in the gray morning cold, her breath making clouds, her sneakers hitting the gravel path in the steady rhythm she'd cultivated because running was the one place where the only thing that mattered was the next stride. She did not change her routine by a single degree. On Friday afternoon, she was in the library, 3 hours into a literature review for her research proposal, when she became aware of being watched. This was not unusual. She had been watched at Blackwood for 3 years, assessed, evaluated, judged. She knew the particular sensation of it on the back of her neck. But this was different. This was not the lazy, entitled surveillance of teenagers deciding whether she was worth bothering today. This was focused, directional. She raised her eyes from her laptop without moving her head and scanned the library's upper level through the atrium windows. Second reading alcove from the left. A man she didn't recognize, 40, business casual, the specific kind of nondescript that is itself a kind of disguise, was looking at his phone but had been in the same position for 45 minutes without turning a page of the book open in front of him. She packed her bag slowly, methodically, and left through the library's side exit and texted Damien from the stairwell. Someone's watching me. Library. 40s, gray jacket, hasn't moved in 45 minutes. His reply was under a minute. Don't engage. Go to your dormitory and stay there until I confirm. She went to her dormitory. She sat on her bed. She waited. Damien's confirmation came 2 hours later. He's one of Hale's people, not law enforcement, freelance. He's been pulled. She typed back, pulled how? He didn't answer that, and she decided not to ask again. That night she called her mother. This was a thing she did every Sunday, not on Friday nights, but she needed her mother's voice the way she sometimes needed water. Not because she was going to tell her mother anything, but because her mother's voice was the only sound in the world that had never required anything from her in return. Baby, her mother said, picking up on the third ring. The sound of the TV in the background, the familiar program her mother watched on Friday evenings. You all right? You never call on Fridays. I'm fine, Mama. She lay back on her bed, one arm over her eyes. Just wanted to hear your voice. A pause. Her mother had a very finely developed instrument for the space between what Amara said and what Amara meant. You sure? I'm sure, she breathed. Tell me about your week. And her mother told her about the week, the neighbor's new dog, the issue with the building's heating, the woman at work who'd brought in a cake for someone's retirement. And Amara listened to all of it with her arm over her eyes and her jaw slowly unclenching. And she thought, I will not let them take this from me. Whatever else they take, I will not let them have this. She said goodnight. She slept. The twist came on Monday. It came in the shape of a woman Amara had never seen before, sitting in the chair outside the headmaster's office when Amara arrived for what she'd been told was a routine check-in with Headmaster Graves. The woman was perhaps 45, dark-suited, with the particular posture of someone accustomed to institutional authority. She had a leather portfolio on her lap and eyes that moved to Amara the moment she came through the administrative suite door and stayed there with professional steadiness. Headmaster Graves appeared in the doorway of his office. He was a small, precise man who had run Blackwood for 16 years and had survived doing so by being consistently, masterfully, almost artistically neutral. He looked at Amara now with an expression she couldn't immediately classify. Not hostile, not apologetic, not quite either of those. Careful. Miss Brooks, please come in. She went in. The suited woman followed. Graves closed the door. This is Ms. Patricia Wynne, Graves said, taking his seat behind the desk. She represents the Academy's legal counsel. Amara looked at Patricia Wynne. Patricia Wynne looked back at her with the expression of someone who has had many difficult conversations and has made her peace with having more. Ms. Brooks, Wynne said, I want to be direct with you because I think that serves everyone better in a situation like this. We're aware that you've had a number of contacts recently with a Mr. Damien Volkov. The room was very quiet. Amara did not move. We're also aware, Wynne continued, that Mr. Volkov has been making inquiries about the Academy's financial operations. We want you to understand that those inquiries are based on mischaracterized information, and that the Academy intends to address them through appropriate legal channels. She paused. What concerns us is your role in facilitating those inquiries. I haven't facilitated anything, Amara said. You've met with Mr. Volkov on at least 2 occasions that we're aware of. He spoke to me once in a public cafe. That's not facilitation, that's breakfast. Wynne's expression didn't change. She had the face of someone whose expressions were a professional choice. Ms. Brooks, I want to be very clear about something. The Academy values your presence here. Your academic record is exceptional. Your research proposal has attracted attention that reflects well on this institution. She opened her portfolio. We would very much like to ensure that your remaining time at Blackwood is productive and uninterrupted. Amara looked at the papers in the portfolio. She could see from where she was sitting that the top document had the Blackwood Academy letterhead. Below it, partially visible, were the words Scholarship Review Committee and Reevaluation. She looked up at Graves. He was looking at his desk. She looked at Wynne. Are you threatening my scholarship? We're conducting a review. That's a yes. Her voice came out very steady. She was distantly surprised by how steady it was. You're conducting a review in response to my contact with someone who is investigating financial irregularities in the scholarship fund. That's retaliation. Ms. Brooks, I'm 19. I'm not stupid. She put her hands flat on her knees. They were shaking slightly under the fabric of her trousers. She did not let Wynne see this. If the Academy's finances are clean, an inquiry shouldn't matter. If a scholarship review is being triggered by who I've had coffee with rather than by my academic performance, that's not a review. That's a message. Patricia Wynne closed her portfolio with a soft, deliberate click. I'd encourage you, she said, to think very carefully about where your loyalties should lie. Damien Volkov is not someone whose interests align with yours. He is a man who uses people, strategic people, visible people. And then he moves on. She tilted her head slightly. You are 19 years old. You have a remarkable future ahead of you. Don't let someone else's agenda consume it. Amara stood. She stood because if she remained sitting, she was going to say something that would explode the entire room, and she understood, with the cold clarity that had been her survival mechanism for 3 years, that exploding rooms was a luxury she could not afford. Thank you for meeting with me, she said, each word measured. I'll give this serious consideration. She walked out of the office, through the administrative suite, past the receptionist who looked up and then quickly away through the main door and into the corridor. And then she was outside in the cold, and she was walking fast, not running, walking across the east courtyard with the November wind in her face. And she pulled out her phone and called Damien, and he answered immediately. They know, she said. Tell me. She told him. She walked and talked at the same time, keeping her voice low, her words clipped. The facts in order because that was the only thing she could control right now. The order of the facts. When she finished, there was a silence that felt different from his previous silences. Heavier. Wynn, he said. Patricia Wynn. Dark suit. Portfolio. You know her. She's been Hale's private legal counsel for 9 years. A pause. She's not Academy counsel. She's his. Amara stopped walking. She was in the middle of the east courtyard, completely exposed, the wind cutting through her jacket. She said she was Academy counsel. She is technically. He had her appointed to the retainer 3 years ago. But her primary client is Hale, not the institution. His voice was very measured, too measured. She was learning to hear what was underneath that, and what was underneath it right now was something she recognized because she felt it herself. The specific tension of a plan meeting an unexpected variable. This is faster than I anticipated. You said you had 4 weeks. I said I'd been sitting on the evidence for 4 weeks. The timeline for delivery it required more preparation. Carla Reyes needs the financial documentation structured in a specific way to fast-track a warrant. And we're not... He stopped. How close? She said. 2 weeks? Possibly less. I don't have 2 weeks, Damien. She said his name for the first time and registered distantly that it felt like a door opening. If they move on the scholarship review, I lose my housing. I lose my class enrollment. I lose... She stopped, breathed. Everything I've built here for 3 years disappears. I know. Then tell me there's a contingency. Another silence. This one stretched long enough that a knot formed in her stomach. Damien, there's a complication, he said carefully. Something I learned last night that I was still assessing before... Tell me now. He did. And the knot in her stomach turned to stone. The person who had told Richard Hale that an inquiry was underway. The person whose indiscretion Damien had mentioned on Thursday night, whose loose word had put Hale on alert and set everything accelerating, was not someone from Damien's business circle. It was Dr. Ellison. The name hit her like cold water to the face. She stood in the middle of the courtyard and said nothing for what felt like a long time, but was probably 5 seconds. That's not possible, she said. Her voice came out strange, flat and strange. She submitted my research proposal. She advocated for it. She told me to stay out of it. She told you to stay out of it, Damien said quietly, because she was already in it. He told her the rest. He told her that Dr. Ellison had been at Blackwood for 22 years, not 16. That 6 years ago, she had discovered the financial irregularities herself, had found them in meeting minutes she wasn't supposed to have access to, and had gone to Richard Hale with what she'd found. Not to the authorities, not to a lawyer, to Hale directly. And Hale had made her a choice. Her pension, her tenure, her position, her very comfortable post at a prestigious institution, or the truth. Dr. Ellison had chosen what most people who are 61 years old with a pension choose. She had chosen to continue. She had chosen the institution over the students it was robbing. And she had carried that choice for 6 years and buried it under advocacy and good teaching and the particular moral currency of caring about the right individual students in the right visible ways. She had advocated for Amara's research proposal genuinely, Damien believed. Genuinely. And possibly also because advocating for Amara was a way of keeping Amara close enough to monitor. And when she'd heard, through whatever channels she had in the administration, that someone was asking questions about Blackwood's finances, she had gone to Hale and told him what she knew. She had not known it was Damien. She had not known how much he had. But she had told Hale that the girl he'd been watching, the scholarship student, the one Preston had been stupid enough to publicly humiliate in front of cameras, had made contact with someone dangerous. She told me to stay out of it, Amara said again. Yes, Because she needed me out of it. Because if I was in it, eventually I'd find out about her. She heard her own breathing, too fast. She slowed it deliberately, mechanically, the way she slowed things when emotion was threatening to become noise. She's been carrying this for 6 years. Yes. She looked me in the face. I know. She stood in the cold courtyard and felt, for the first time since Tuesday morning, genuinely at a loss. Not afraid. She'd trained herself out of productive fear years ago. Not angry, yet the anger was coming. She could feel it building somewhere below the waterline, but it hadn't arrived. What she felt right now was the particular terrible weightlessness of discovering that the ground you thought you were standing on was never as solid as it seemed, and that the people you'd allowed yourself to almost trust were operating under rules you hadn't been given. "What do we do?" she said. "Carla Reyes needs to move faster than we planned. I'm meeting with her tonight." He paused. "But, Amara, this changes your exposure significantly. Hale knows you're connected to me. He knows enough to move on your scholarship within days, possibly hours. And if he moves on the scholarship before Reyes has a warrant, then I'm out," she said. "Removed from the academy, removed from my housing, and whatever story I could tell about what I know becomes an expelled student's grievance instead of a witness's testimony." Yes. She looked across the courtyard. The academy's main building rose against the gray November sky, stone and ivy and oil portraits and 137 years of institutional power that had been wielded, refined, and protected by people who understood that the best way to silence someone was not to threaten them, but to make them disappear cleanly, administratively, with paperwork. She thought about destiny. She thought about the hallway. She thought about her mother's voice on the phone saying, "You sure?" With that particular frequency of a woman who has spent a lifetime learning to hear what her daughter doesn't say. She thought about Dr. Ellison telling her, "Do your work. That's the only thing that lasts." 6 years of silence. 6 years of choosing the institution over its students. 6 years of looking the girls she was robbing of their full endowment in the face and saying, "Good work, and I believe in you, and here is how you survive this place," while her signature sat on documents that helped make that survival necessary. "I need something from you," Amara said. "Tell me. The financial documents you have, the fund diversion records, the Delaware company filings, the signature pages." She was already walking back toward the main building, her stride lengthening. "I need copies, everything. I need them tonight." A brief silence. "What are you planning?" "I'm planning to stop being the piece that everyone else is moving around the board," she said. "I've spent 3 years being managed by this institution. I've spent a week being managed by you. I'm done being managed." "Amara, you said I was leverage." She pushed open the main building door, stepped into the warmth of the corridor. "You said leverage can be protected, but you were talking about protecting me from the outside. That's not protection. That's a cage with better intentions." She stopped walking. She was standing at the base of the main staircase, beneath the oil portrait of the man who'd founded Blackwood Academy in 1887, whose descendants had sat on this board, and whose money had helped build the very apparatus now being used to erase girls like her. She looked up at the portrait for a moment. Old man in a dark coat, one hand on a desk, the particular expression of someone who had built something and fully intended it to outlast him. She looked away. "Send me the documents," she said. "All of them. Tonight." Another silence. Longer this time. "If you do what I think you're going to do," Damien said slowly, "it accelerates everything. Hale's reaction will be immediate. We lose the element of, we already lost it." Her voice was very quiet, very clear. "He knows something is coming. Dr. Ellison made sure of that. The element of surprise was gone before I walked into Graves's office this morning." She started up the stairs. "The only question now is whether what comes next happens on his schedule or mine." The silence stretched for 4 seconds. 5. "I'll have everything to you by 8 o'clock, Damien said. She reached the top of the stairs. The second-floor corridor of Blackwood Academy stretched ahead of her, lined with classroom doors, with the particular silence of an institution between periods, that held breath quality of a building that has been the same for a very long time and expects to continue being the same. "One more thing," she said. "Yes, Dr. Ellison." She stopped outside the door of the biology seminar room. Through the narrow window in the door, she could see the room was empty. Afternoon light coming through the tall windows, equipment arranged neatly on the benches, everything in its place. She advocated for my research proposal. She went to bat for me when she could have let it disappear. 6 years of silence, and she still did that. She did, Damien said, and she heard that he understood what she was really asking. That doesn't cancel what she chose, Amar said, but it means something. I don't know what yet, but it means something. What do you want to do about her? Amara looked through the narrow window at the empty room where she'd spent 3 years learning the language of cells and systems and the elegant, ruthless logic of biology. That nothing survives by standing still, that adaptation is not weakness but the most sophisticated form of strength, that the organism which cannot change when its environment changes does not persist. Nothing yet, she said. Right now I need to write something. She ended the call. She pushed open the door to the empty seminar room and went to the bench where she always sat, third from the front, and she pulled out her notebook, the one she used for research notes, the one that had her mitochondrial proposal in it, the one that also, she now realized, had been the record of 3 years of the most important work of her life, and she opened it to a blank page, and she began to write, not research notes, not a proposal, a statement. Every detail she knew, every date, every conversation, every name, organized with the precision she brought to her science, clear and sourced and irrefutable. The kind of document that doesn't ask to be believed because it doesn't need to. Because it simply is what it is. A thing assembled from facts by someone who has spent years being told her account of reality was insufficient and who has decided, sitting alone in a quiet room with the November light coming through tall windows, that she is done letting other people decide what constitutes sufficient. She wrote for 90 minutes without stopping. She was on the last page when the door opened. She looked up. It was not Preston. It was not Dr. Ellison. It was not Headmaster Graves or Patricia Wynne or anyone she might have expected. It was Marcus, livestream Marcus, silent follower Marcus, the one who had filmed everything and said nothing and whose keycard had let Preston into her dormitory. And he was standing in the doorway looking at her with an expression she had never once seen on his face in 3 years. Not the lazy amusement he wore for Preston's performances, not the studied indifference he deployed when she walked past. He looked, she realized, like someone who had made a decision and was not entirely certain, on the other side of it, that it was the right one. They're planning something, he said. For tomorrow. Preston doesn't know about it, but his father does, and He stopped, swallowed. I've been a part of a lot of things I didn't. Another stop. He couldn't seem to find the architecture of the sentence he wanted. There's an abandoned section in the East Wing, the construction annex from the 2019 renovation that was never finished. They're going to... He told her what they were planning. The notebook in her hands went very still. She looked at Marcus. Really looked at him. The way she'd looked at Preston in the hallway last week. The way she was learning to look at people now that she understood the cost of not looking carefully enough. And she saw a young man who had filmed the worst moments of her life for an audience of thousands, and who was standing in a doorway right now doing what might be, she thought, the first genuinely difficult thing he had ever chosen to do. She thought, it is too late for this to make up for anything. She thought, it is not too late for this to matter. She closed her notebook. She looked at Marcus. She said, how long do we have? And Marcus told her. And the window was very small, and the plan that was forming in her mind as he spoke was not safe and was not clean, and was not the kind of thing that the girl she'd been 3 years ago, head down, grades up, don't give them anything, would have considered for a single second. But she was not that girl anymore. She picked up her phone. She called Damien Volkov. And this time when he answered, she was the one who spoke first. She told Damien everything Marcus had said in under 3 minutes. She spoke fast, not because she was panicking, but because fast was what the window required. And she had always been someone who understood that the quality of your thinking under pressure is the only thinking that actually counts. Marcus stood in the doorway of the empty seminar room while she talked, his hands in his jacket pockets, his shoulders carrying the specific posture of someone who has just stepped off a ledge and is still processing the fact that they jumped. Damien listened without interrupting. That was something she'd cataloged about him. He listened the way scientists observe, without inserting himself into what he was receiving. When she finished, there was a silence of approximately 4 seconds. "Tomorrow morning," he said. 7 a.m. The East Wing Construction Annex. Marcus says 3 of them, possibly 4. Not Preston. She looked at Marcus when she said the last part, and he confirmed with a slight dip of his chin. His father kept him out of it. Plausible deniability. Richard Hale is tidier than his son. A pause. "Who are the 3? She looked at Marcus again. He said the names aloud and she repeated them into the phone. Damien said nothing for a moment. Then, "Carla Reyes needs to know about this tonight. What they're planning constitutes criminal conspiracy to intimidate a witness. That changes her authorization significantly." "How significantly?" "Significantly enough that she may be able to move on the warrants before tomorrow morning." Her heart rate, which had been elevated since Marcus walked through the door, did something complicated. Not calmer, more focused, like a lens adjusting. "And if she can't? Then we have contingencies." His voice was steady. The way a structure is steady, not because nothing is pushing against it, but because it was built to hold. "I need you to do exactly what I'm about to tell you, and I need you to do it without deviation. Can you do that?" She thought about the last week, about all the ways she'd been told what to do and by whom and for what reasons, and about the specific, bone-level exhaustion of always being the variable that other people were solving around. "Tell me the plan first," she said. "Then I'll tell you if I can do it." Another one of those silences that meant he was recalibrating. "Fair," he said. He told her the plan. She listened. She did not interrupt. When he finished, she sat with it for 5 seconds, running it through the part of her mind that checked structural integrity, the part she used for research proposals and lab designs, the part that asked, where does this fail and what happens when it does? It could fail in 3 places. She identified all 3 without prompting and told him. "I know," he said. "For 2 of them. For the 3rd, he said, that's why you're the one who has to be there, not me. Me being in that building changes what it is. You being in that building is what makes it undeniable." She understood. She did not like it. She understood it anyway. "Okay," she said. "Okay." A pause. The first time she'd heard something like relief in his voice. "Get some sleep." "You're not serious." "No," he admitted. "I'm not." She ended the call. She looked at Marcus, who was still standing in the doorway, looking like a person who had done something irreversible and was just now beginning to understand what irreversible felt like from the inside. "Why?" she said. He knew what she was asking. He looked at the floor. "I've watched you for 3 years." He said it to the floor, not to her. "I watched everything. I filmed some of it." He stopped, started again. "My mom works 2 jobs. We're not like them. I'm here on a partial scholarship too, except I never—" He pressed his mouth closed. "I just never had the guts to be what you are, too." She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about all the things she could say. She chose the one that was true and useful. "Don't tell anyone we talked. Go back to your room. Tomorrow morning, stay away from the East Wing." He nodded, looked up at her once, quick, like he was checking to see if there was something more. Forgiveness, maybe, or absolution, or some sign that this one thing he'd done would balance against the accumulated weight of 3 years of filmed cruelty. She didn't give him any of those things, because she didn't have them to give, and because giving him something he hadn't earned would have been its own kind of lie. He left. She sat alone in the seminar room for another minute. The November light through the tall windows had gone from gray to dark, while she hadn't been paying attention, and the room had taken on the particular quality of empty institutional spaces at night, all its daytime purpose evacuated, leaving just walls and benches and the faint smell of chemicals and chalk. She opened her notebook. She finished the last page of her statement. Then she went to her room, lay down fully clothed for the 2nd night in a row, and spent 6 hours in the shallow, restless country between sleep and wakefulness, where her mind ran the plan's 3 failure points in rotation until she knew every branch of them the way she knew the structure of a molecule. Completely, precisely, without sentiment. At 5:15 a.m., she got up, washed her face, put on the warmest clothes she had, made herself eat half a piece of bread, because she'd learned from years of early morning track that your body will betray your mind if you don't maintain it, And today of all days, she could not afford a betrayal from inside. At 5:40, she received a text from Damien. Reyes moved. Warrant signed at 2 a.m. Federal agents will be in position by 6:45. You need to be in position by 6:30. Do not enter the annex. Stay visible in the east corridor. Let them come to you. She read it twice, typed back, understood. Then she picked up her phone and made one more call. It rang 4 times. 5. Hello? Dr. Ellison's voice was rough with interrupted sleep. It's Amara, she said. I need you to come to the academy. Now. A silence. The sound of someone sitting up in bed. Amara, it's not yet. I know what time it is. She kept her voice very level, very clean. The way you speak when you've already moved past anger into something harder and colder and more durable. I need you at the East Wing corridor by 6:15, not the annex, the corridor. Why would I? Because I know, Amara said. I know about 6 years ago. I know about what you found and what you chose. And I'm giving you an opportunity, one, and it expires in about 90 minutes, to choose differently. She paused. I think you've wanted to. I think that's why you submitted my proposal. I think that's why you told me to stay out of it, because you were trying to protect me from something you couldn't bring yourself to face. She paused again. Face it now. 6:15, East Corridor. She hung up before Dr. Ellison could answer. She put her phone in her jacket pocket, picked up her notebook, and left her room. The academy at 6 in the morning was a different building than the academy at any other hour. The corridors were dim and cold. The cleaning staff not yet arrived. The kind of institutional silence that made the building feel like what it actually was beneath its prestige. Stone and steel and very old habit. Amara walked the east corridor alone, her footsteps quiet on the marble, her breath just visible in the cold. The construction annex door was at the far end, reinforced, marked with the yellow and black tape of ongoing renovation, the kind of door that exists at the edge of institutions, where the finished surfaces give way to exposed concrete and unfinished business. She did not go to the door. She stopped 20 feet short of it, in a section of the corridor where a tall window looked out over the east grounds. And she stood there and breathed and waited. 6:12, 6:14. At 6:16, Dr. Ellison came around the corner from the main staircase. She was dressed, but barely. Coat over what looked like clothes she'd put on in a hurry, her silver hair not yet arranged in its usual precise way. She looked older in this light, and this hour, than she did in the seminar room, and she looked at Amara with an expression that Amara recognized because she'd seen it in the mirror at 5:15 that morning. The face of someone who has arrived at a reckoning they've been postponing for longer than is clean. They stood 10 feet apart. The corridor was empty in both directions. How much do you know? Dr. Ellison said. Enough. Amara kept her voice low. The meeting with Hale 6 years ago. The choice he gave you. The arrangement since. The call you made last week. She watched the older woman absorb each sentence like a series of small impacts. All of it. Dr. Ellison pressed her mouth together. Her hands, Amara noticed, were not steady. I tried to protect you. The proposal, I know. She said it without heat. I know you did. I know it cost you something to do it, and I know it was real. And I know it doesn't erase the rest. She took a breath. There are federal agents arriving in approximately 20 minutes. There's documentation of everything. The fund diversion, the signatures, the subsidiary accounts. Richard Hale is going to be arrested today, Calloway and Forsyth too. Dr. Ellison made a sound, very small, like something had given way somewhere internal. You have a choice, Amar said. Again, the same kind of choice, except this time I'm the one offering it instead of him. She held the older woman's eyes. You can go home right now and wait for someone to come and find you. Or you can go to Carla Reyes. She's a federal investigator. I'll give you her number. And you can walk in voluntarily and tell her what you know. Everything. 6 years of everything. She paused. One of those is survival. The other is something better than survival. The corridor was silent. Outside the tall window, the east grounds were dark gray in the pre-dawn, the trees leafless, the November morning hard and cold and without ornament. Dr. Ellison said, Why are you offering me this? Because you looked me in the face for 3 years and told me the truth mattered. Amara's voice didn't break. She'd known it wouldn't. I want to find out if you believed it. A very long silence. "The number," Dr. Ellison said quietly. "Give me the number." Amara had it written in her notebook. She tore the page out and handed it across the 10 feet of corridor between them. Dr. Ellison took it. Their hands did not touch. The older woman looked down at the number. Then she looked up at Amara with an expression that had several things in it simultaneously, and none of them were clean or comfortable or resolved. Guilt, yes, and something that might become gratitude in time, and the specific, devastated look of a person seeing, all at once, the full shape of what they let themselves become. "Your research," she said. "It's extraordinary, genuinely. That was never—" "I know," Amara said. "Go." Dr. Ellison went. Amara turned back to the corridor, checked her watch, 6:22. At 6:29, the annex door opened. She heard it before she saw it. The specific sound of a heavy door pushed from the inside, the scrape of its base on the concrete threshold. She turned, slowly, and stood facing it, and did not move from her position 20 feet away, and kept her hands loose at her sides and her breathing deliberate and her eyes open. 3 of them. James Calloway, Terrence Calloway's son, whose name she'd learned over 3 years the way you learn all the names in a system that has power over you. A boy named Griffin Morse, whose father she now knew was one of the signatories on the Delaware Holding Company's operating documents. And a third she recognized from peripheral encounters over 3 years. Heavy, broad, a year older than the others, whose name she didn't know but whose function she now understood. They stopped when they saw her standing in the corridor rather than inside the annex where they'd evidently expected to find her. James recovered first. He was better at this than his father, she thought. Better at composure, better at the performance of it. He almost smiled. "Amara, you're early." "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," she said. He looked at the corridor behind her. Empty. Looked at her. Processing. Something in his calculation was off, and she could see him feeling for where. "We just want to talk," he said. "You planned this 2 days ago. You didn't tell Preston because his father wanted him clean." She kept her voice conversational, like she was discussing lab results. "There are at least 3 things in that annex you didn't want anyone to see, and the fact that I'm standing out here instead of in there is making you reconsider your timeline." Griffin moved slightly to the left. Positioning. She tracked it without looking directly at him. "You've been spending time with dangerous people," James said. His voice had shifted. The performed friendliness gone now, replaced by something flatter and more honest. "Mr. Volkov is not someone who helps people out of kindness. Whatever he told you, whatever he promised you. He told me who signed the holding company documents," she said. "He told me about Callaway Capital's redirected contributions from 2017 through 2023. He told me the amount, which is approximately $2.3 million, and he told me the forensic accountant's name who's going to testify to all of it in a federal proceeding." She watched James's face change, watched it change in stages, like a building settling. Composure first, then control, then just the face underneath. "He also told me that your father called his lawyer at 11:15 last night, and that the lawyer told him to say nothing to no one and to destroy nothing, which your father then did not do, which is going to matter significantly." "You don't know what you're—" Griffin started. "Stop!" The word came out hard and clean, and it stopped him. "I know exactly what I'm talking about. I have spent 3 years in this institution being told I didn't belong here. I have been humiliated in front of thousands of people on the internet. I have had my scholarship threatened, my advisor compromised, and a surveillance operative put on me in my own school library." She breathed, steady. "And I have documented every single piece of it." She held up the notebook. "This is a notarized statement," she said, "time-stamped, witnessed, describing in detail every incident, every conversation, every name, every date. There are 3 copies. One is already with federal investigators. One is with a journalist at the Tribune who I called at 11 p.m. last night. And one," she held it up, "is this one, which I'm keeping." The third boy, the one whose name she didn't know, looked at James. Something passed between them that was partly communication and partly the dissolution of a plan. James Calloway was, she thought, genuinely intelligent. Not as intelligent as he believed himself to be, which was the specific liability of every person in this school who had been told their whole life that intelligence was a birthright rather than a practice. but intelligent enough to understand, in this moment, that the variables had shifted in a direction that could not be corrected by anything he could do in an empty corridor at 6:30 in the morning. He looked at her with something she hadn't expected and almost didn't recognize because she'd never received it from anyone at Blackwood. Actual, undisguised assessment, like she was, for the first time, someone worth measuring accurately. "How long have you been planning this?" he said. "I've been preparing for this for 3 years," she said. "I just didn't know that's what I was doing." The sound came from both ends of the corridor simultaneously. Footsteps. Multiple, purposeful, the specific cadence of people who move in coordination and don't need to announce themselves. From the main staircase end, 4 figures in dark jackets, the kind without insignia, moving with the economical precision of people who have done this before. From the annex end, 2 more, who had apparently been inside the unfinished construction space for an undetermined amount of time because that was the second contingency she'd identified on the plan's structural map, and Damien had, it turned out, already addressed it. The lead figure from the staircase end held up a credential wallet without breaking stride. "Federal investigators, James Calloway, Griffin Morse. Don't move. Professional, flat, no performance in it. Just the facts of what was happening, delivered in the language of inevitability." Griffin moved. He didn't run. There was nowhere to run to, and some part of him must have known that. But he moved, sideways. The animal response of a body that doesn't have a plan but needs to do something with the adrenaline. One of the dark-jacketed figures cut him off so cleanly it barely looked like a movement at all, just a repositioning, a closing of a gap, and Griffin stopped. James did not move. He stood very still, his hands at his sides, and looked at Amara. She looked back at him. "This doesn't—" He stopped, started again. "This isn't the end of this." "No," she agreed. "It's the beginning of the part where there are consequences." She held his gaze. "You've never had that before. It's going to feel different than you expect." The investigators moved past her. One of them said Miss Brooks, in acknowledgement as they went. The kind of acknowledgement that carries weight, the kind that means we know who you are and why you're here and what you did to make this possible. And the corridor, which had been cold and still and full of the dense potential of everything about to happen, began to fill with the sounds of the thing actually happening. James was talking now, not to her, to the investigator beside him, the careful, measured speech of someone who has been told very clearly by a lawyer to say nothing, and who is struggling badly with that instruction because staying silent feels like losing. And people like James Calloway have been losing for approximately 48 hours, and they don't have the muscle for it. Amara stepped back against the corridor wall and watched. She was aware of her own heartbeat. It had been elevated since 5:15 that morning, and she'd been managing it the way she managed everything, through conscious attention, through the decision to direct it rather than be driven by it. Now, standing against the wall with the notebook in her hands and the cold of the stone at her back, it was slowing. Not because the danger was gone. She understood enough about what Damien had told her about Richard Hale to know that a morning's arrest did not constitute safety, but because something had shifted in the weight distribution of the last 72 hours, and the shift was in her direction, and her body, trained by 3 years of carrying more than its share, recognized the change. Her phone buzzed. "Damien, East Wing is clear. Reyes has 3 additional warrants. The Hale residence, Calloway Capital offices, and the Academy's Financial Records office. This is moving faster than I built the timeline for." She typed back, "Is that good?" A pause. Then, "It means they're scared. Scared people make mistakes." "Yes. It's good." Another buzz, seconds later. "You should know. Graves just called Reyes voluntarily. He wants to cooperate." She stared at that for a moment. Headmaster Graves, who had been carefully, masterfully, almost artistically neutral for 16 years, who had looked at his desk while Patricia Wynne delivered her portfolio and her threats. Graves, who had apparently spent the night measuring the weight of the institution he'd served against the weight of what he'd allowed to happen inside it, and had arrived at a conclusion. She thought about what it meant to arrive at a conclusion after a very long time of not having one. She thought about Dr. Ellison, with a phone number torn from a notebook. She thought about Marcus in a doorway saying, "I just never had the guts." She put her phone away. Down the corridor, James Calloway was being escorted toward the main staircase, his hands not yet restrained, the investigators flanking him at the particular distance that says we don't need to touch you because there is nowhere for you to go. The unnamed third boy sat against the opposite wall, his head in his hands, in the posture of someone for whom the morning has become deeply, irrevocably, definitively too much. Griffin Morse was standing very still and very pale in a way that made him look like he might be sick. Amara watched all of it with the particular attention she brought to things she needed to remember accurately. She was still watching when the sound came from the far end of the corridor, not from the staircase, not from the annex, but from the smaller side door that connected the east wing to the administrative building. The door opened hard. Footsteps. One set, fast, uncalibrated. And then Preston Hale came around the corner at something between a walk and a run, his face the color of chalk, his expensive jacket open over a shirt that he appeared to have put on in a hurry, and he stopped dead when he saw the scene in the corridor. He looked at James, at the investigators, at Griffin, at the wall, at Amara. She watched him process it, watched the sequence move through him. Confusion first, then understanding, then something that was neither of those things. Something raw, something she didn't have a clean word for. It was the look of a person watching the architecture of everything they were raised to believe was permanent turn out not to be. He took one step toward her. The nearest investigator moved slightly, not blocking him, just registering the movement, just being present in a way that said, "We're aware of you." Preston stopped. He looked at Amara across the corridor, across the space of 3 years and everything that had happened in them, and his mouth moved once without producing sound. Then very quietly, with no audience, with no phone in his hand, with nobody filming. "I didn't know. About the money. About what my father was." He stopped. His jaw worked. "I didn't know." She looked at him. She believed him, actually. Not because Preston Hale deserved the benefit of her doubt, but because she was a scientist, and the evidence supported it. Richard Hale was not the kind of man who shared operational details with the instrument of his performances. "I know," she said. "That doesn't—" He stopped again. "No," she said. "It doesn't." He looked at her for another moment. Then he looked at the corridor floor. The same marble he'd walked every day for 4 years as the unquestioned air of everything this place represented. And he stood there in the early morning cold with the sound of federal activity moving through the building around him. And he looked, for the first time since she'd known him, like what he actually was. A 20-year-old boy in a building that was no longer the building he thought it was, in a world that was no longer operating by the rules he'd been given. Her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Not Damien, a number she recognized after a moment as the Tribune journalist she'd called at 11 p.m. the night before. She answered. "Ms. Brooks." A woman's voice, alert, the specific alertness of someone who has been awake since before dawn for reasons that are about to become a story. "We've received information that federal warrants are being executed at Blackwood Academy this morning. Can you confirm your involvement?" She looked down the corridor, at James being walked toward the stairs, at Griffin against the wall, at Preston on the marble floor of everything he'd inherited, standing in the wreckage of a morning that hadn't been supposed to go this way. She thought about what Dr. Ellison had told her. Do your work. That's the only thing that lasts. She thought, this is my work. Yes, she said into the phone. "I can confirm. I have a full statement ready, and I have documentation of everything. The financial fraud, the witness intimidation, the scholarship fund diversion, all of it." She took a breath. "I want to make sure this is reported accurately. I want to make sure the students are named, the ones who lost their scholarships. Destiny Williams, the others. I want their names in the story." "I can do that." A pause. "Ms. Brooks, how long has this been building?" She looked down the east corridor of Blackwood Academy. Through the tall window at the end, the November sky was beginning to lighten. Not sunrise yet, not even close. Just the first gray intimation of it, the sky deciding, after a very long night, to begin. 3 years, she said. "At least 3 years on my end." She straightened her back against the cold wall. "Longer than that on everyone else's. Are you safe right now?" She thought about the question. She thought about what safe actually meant. Not the absence of threat. Because threat didn't disappear with a morning's warrants. Not the absence of risk, because she had just made herself the most visible person in a story that was going to be very loud for a very long time. Not comfort, not certainty, not the feeling of standing on solid ground. She thought, safe is when you have done what you came to do and you are still standing. Yes, she said, and down the corridor around the corner, past the marble and the portraits and the iron gates and the institution that had tried for 3 years to make her invisible, she heard the doors of Blackwood Academy open, multiple doors simultaneously, the heavy sound of institutional entrances giving way, and the morning, cold and gray and entirely unfinished, came rushing in. The Tribune story ran at 9:17 that morning. Amara knew the exact time because she was sitting in the Academy's east corridor on a radiator cover that was barely warm, her back against the stone wall, her notebook in her lap, when her phone screen lit up with the notification. She didn't click through immediately. She sat with the notification for a moment, the way you sit with a letter you've been waiting a long time to receive, aware that opening it will change the texture of everything that comes after, and wanting one more second of the before. Then she opened it. The headline was clean and unambiguous. Federal warrants executed at Blackwood Academy. Board members arrested in multi-year scholarship fund fraud. Below it, in the second paragraph, the reporter had done what Amara had asked. Destiny Williams' name. 4 other names she hadn't known. Students who had passed through Blackwood in the 7 years of the scheme, whose non-renewals she now understood as clearances, as the quiet removal of inconvenient witnesses before anyone knew there was something to witness. She read every name twice. She put her phone in her pocket and sat in the corridor while the building moved around her. The sound of administrators and urgent conversation, the particular tone of institutional crisis management traveling through walls, phones ringing in offices, the slow gathering noise of a place understanding that it has become a different place than it was yesterday. At 9:45, Carla Reyes found her. She was not what Amara had constructed in her mind from the few facts Damien had provided. She was perhaps 47, compact, wearing a dark blazer over a gray shirt with the collar open, her hair pulled back with the specific practicality of someone who had stopped making aesthetic decisions about her appearance a long time ago in favor of decisions about efficiency. She had a face that had learned to carry a great deal without showing the weight of it, and eyes that moved when she spoke to you. Not away, but to specific things, specific details, the way a person's eyes move when they are constructing an accurate picture rather than a convenient one. She sat down next to Amara on the radiator cover without asking if the space was available. "Ms. Brooks," she said. Not a question, an acknowledgement. "Agent Reyes, investigator. I'm not FBI." She said it without correction energy, just a fact. "How are you doing?" "I've been better," Amara said. "I've been considerably worse." Reyes made a sound that was almost a laugh. Richard Hale was taken into federal custody at 7:52 this morning at his residence. His attorneys are already on site and generating significant paperwork, which is expected. She looked at the corridor wall ahead of them, not at Amara. The manner of someone delivering information they want received cleanly, without the interference of eye contact. Calloway and Forsyth were picked up at their respective offices at 8:15. The Academy's financial records have been secured. Patricia Wynn is currently in a conference room in our field office, explaining the nature of her dual representation, which is going to be a lengthy conversation. Graves? Cooperative. His statement corroborates the fund diversion timeline and adds detail on 2 other incidents of board interference we hadn't fully mapped. She paused. He knew less than Ellison and more than he should have been comfortable knowing. He's made a choice to be useful now. Whether that translates to anything for him legally depends on what the prosecutors decide to do with useful. Amara nodded. She thought about Graves looking at his desk while Patricia Wynn delivered her threats. The long machinery of a decision that had apparently been running under the surface all along, waiting for a moment that was either the right one or simply the only one left. "Dr. Ellison," Amara said. Reyes was quiet for a moment. "She came in voluntarily at 6:58 this morning. I spoke with her personally." She looked at Amara now. Direct, measured. "She gave us 6 years of it. Everything she knew, everything she'd seen, dates and names and specific conversations. The kind of testimony that takes a long time to give because the person giving it has been holding it for a long time and it doesn't come out in a clean line." She paused. It's significant. It fills gaps in the documentation that would have taken us months to reconstruct from records alone. What happens to her? That's not entirely my determination. Reyes held her gaze. But voluntary disclosure, substantive cooperation, no direct financial benefit from the scheme, those are meaningful factors. She made a bad choice 6 years ago under significant pressure. She spent those 6 years making a series of smaller bad choices to protect the original one. That's not uncommon. It's not excusable. But it's not the same as what Hale and Calloway built deliberately over a decade. A pause. I'll be honest with you. She may not face charges. She may lose her position. Both of those things can be true simultaneously. Amara sat with that. She thought about Dr. Ellison in the corridor in the pre-dawn dark, her silver hair unset, taking a torn page from a 19-year-old's notebook with hands that weren't steady. She thought about 22 years of teaching at an institution that had asked her, at the 6-year mark, to choose between what she knew and what she had, and what that choice must have felt like at the time, and what carrying it must have felt like afterward. She didn't forgive it. She wasn't built for forgiveness in the large, clean, cinematic sense that the word implied. But she understood it, and understanding it cost her something, and she accepted that cost as part of the price of seeing people accurately. My scholarship, she said. The review initiated by Richard Hale is void. Reyes said it with the finality of someone closing a file. The endowment fund is being placed under independent administration pending the investigation. Your enrollment status is unaffected. A brief pause. Additionally, the Harmon Institute Fellowship Committee was contacted this morning by the Federal Prosecutor's Office to clarify that there were no legitimate academic grounds for any delay in Ms. Amara Brooks's research evaluation. I'm told the December panel date is confirmed. Amara looked at the corridor wall. She breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth and felt, in the cold stone quiet of the east wing of Blackwood Academy, the specific, bewildering sensation of a weight she'd been carrying so long, she'd stopped noticing it beginning, very slowly, to shift. She did not cry. She had made that promise years ago, and she kept it. But her eyes burned for a moment, and she let them burn, and that was enough. Thank you, she said to Reyes. Don't thank me. You built the case. Reyes stood, straightened her blazer with the efficient gesture of someone returning to motion. Your statement was the structural piece we needed. The documentation Volkov provided was substantial, but documentation without a human account is abstract. Abstract things are easier to contest. She looked down at Amara. You made it uncontestable. She left down the corridor with the same economical stride she'd arrived with, and Amara sat alone again in the east wing, and the building made its sounds around her, and the November morning outside the windows was fully light now, gray and cold and completely ordinary, in the way that mornings are ordinary even when everything in them is not. She stayed there for 20 minutes, doing nothing. She was not a person who did nothing easily, and she was aware of that, and she let herself do it anyway. Then she got up, straightened her jacket, picked up her notebook, and went to find Damien Volkov. He was in the main entrance hall. Not prominently. He was standing near the far wall, slightly to one side of the corridor of activity, the way he always seemed to position himself in rooms, present but not centered, watching from an angle that gave him the full field. He was wearing a different suit than yesterday, which meant he'd gone home at some point in the early hours and returned, which meant he hadn't slept either. And she filed that away in the growing record of small things about him that made him more legible to her than he'd been a week ago. He saw her when she was still 20 feet away and held her gaze as she walked toward him, and his expression did the thing it sometimes did, shifted in the specific way of someone who is deciding, in real time, how much of what they're feeling to make visible. She stopped in front of him. They stood in the entrance hall of Blackwood Academy, beneath the oil portraits and the vaulted ceiling and the 137-year-old architecture of an institution that was in the process of becoming irrevocably different from what it had been yesterday. Reyes talked to you? She said. This morning, before she came to you. He looked at her with the full, steady attention he'd given her in the cafe on Harmon Street 8 days ago. How are you? Tired. She said it because it was accurate. And she stopped. searched for the right word and found several that were all partially true. I don't have a clean word for the other thing. The other thing is what comes after 3 years of something very hard suddenly not being that hard anymore, he said. It feels strange, unstable, like the floor changed texture and your body hasn't caught up. She looked at him. Did someone tell you that, or did you figure it out? I figured it out, he said. When I was 31. It took longer than it should have. She nodded. She looked at the entrance hall around them, the investigators moving through, the administrators in small, urgent clusters, a television crew that had arrived from the Tribune's broadcast partner and was being firmly redirected by one of Reyes's colleagues toward the exterior. The portraits of the founders looked down at all of it with expressions that had been captured in oil before any of this was possible and had no language for what they were witnessing. The scholarships, she said. The other students, Destiny Williams and the others. I'm aware of them, he said. I need you to... She stopped, recalibrated. I'm not asking you to do something out of charity. I'm telling you that part of this has to be restitution, real restitution. Those students lost things they cannot get back, but they can get money and apology on record and documentation that what happened to them was not their failure. She held his eyes. That's not optional. If there's anything left of what you built here, that's the first thing it pays for. He looked at her for a long moment. I was going to propose exactly that, he said. Independent scholarships administered outside the Academy's existing structure with Carlo Reyes's office as oversight. He paused. But I wanted you to be the one who asked for it, because it should come from someone who knows what it cost. She said nothing for a moment. Then, that's either very principled or very strategic. With me, he said, those aren't always different things. She almost smiled. Almost. I know. The gala had been scheduled for 3 weeks. November 21st, the Academy's annual donor event. Black tie, string quartet, the kind of evening that existed to remind wealthy people that their money was connected to something that mattered. The administration, in the 3 weeks following the morning of the warrants, had attempted twice to cancel it, and been advised by the new interim board, hastily constituted, still finding its footing, that canceling would be read as collapse, and that what was needed was continuity, transparency, the visible evidence of an institution reforming rather than retreating. So the gala happened. Amara attended because Reyes asked her to, and because the interim board chair, a woman named Gloria Chen, who had been brought in from outside, and who had called Amara personally and spoken to her for 45 minutes about what the scholarship program needed to become, had asked her to as well. She wore the one dress she owned that was appropriate for a black tie event, which was a dark green that her mother had bought her 2 Christmases ago for an occasion that had never materialized, and she spent 40 minutes on her hair and arrived at 7:15 with her notebook in a small bag that didn't match anything. The ballroom was the largest room in Blackwood Academy, and it had been designed in 1923 by an architect who believed that institutional spaces should make individuals feel the appropriate scale of their significance in the broader order, which meant very high ceilings, very cold marble, and chandeliers that were genuinely impressive. It was full of people dressed in the language of money, not all of them the money that had been implicated in what had happened, but enough that the room had a particular texture, a particular cautious energy, the energy of people who are accustomed to certainty, finding themselves in a room that has recently become uncertain. She got a glass of water and stood near the east wall and watched. Preston Hale was there. She hadn't expected that, and she stood a little straighter when she saw him, not in defense, just adjustment. He was at the far end of the room with his mother, who Amara had never really registered as a separate person before, always having experienced her only in proximity to the men of her family. She was a small woman, blonde, wearing a kind of contained devastation that Amara recognized as the specific grief of someone whose life has been built inside a structure that turned out to be fraudulent and who is not sure yet what they are now that the structure is gone. Preston saw her. He crossed the room, which she respected, because the room was full and crossing it required that people see you crossing it, and there was no way to cross the ballroom of Blackwood Academy toward Amara Brooks in the 3rd week after the federal warrants without that meaning something visible. He stopped in front of her. He was not wearing the ease he used to wear. It had been one of his most natural features, that effortless, inherited ease, and its absence made him look like someone wearing a suit they weren't sure belonged to them. "I don't know what to say," he said. That's probably accurate, she said. He pressed his mouth together. My father is... He stopped. Started again. The arraignment is next week. His lawyers are... He stopped again. I'm going to drop out of Blackwood. She hadn't expected that either. Why? Because I've been walking through these halls for 4 years, acting like I built them. He looked at the room around him, the chandeliers, the marble, the portraits. I didn't build anything. I just inherited the air in here and breathed it like it was mine. A pause. I need to go somewhere I don't already own everything. She looked at him carefully. That's either the most self-aware thing you've ever said, or it's performance. I know, he said. I can't tell yet either. He held her eyes for a moment. I'm sorry for what I did in that hallway, for 3 years of everything before it. I know that... He stopped. I know that doesn't fix it. It doesn't, she said. I know. They stood there in the ballroom with the noise of the event moving around them, and she thought about what forgiveness was and what it wasn't, and she thought about the difference between an apology that wants to be absolved and an apology that simply needs to be said, and she looked at Preston Hale and tried to figure out which one this was. She decided she wasn't sure, and that not being sure was an honest answer, and that honest answers were worth more than clean ones. Go somewhere that's hard, she said, not somewhere that fixes your resume, somewhere that requires something from you that you've never had to give before. She held his eyes. That's not advice I'm giving you out of kindness. It's advice I'm giving you because I think the person you might become is more useful in the world than the one you've been. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in his face that she didn't have a name for and didn't try to name. He nodded once, slightly, and walked back across the room to his mother. She watched him go. At 8:47, Richard Hale arrived. She heard the shift in the room before she saw him, a subtle change in the conversational pitch, a collective reorientation, the way the magnetic field of a room responds to a new element. He came through the main ballroom doors with 2 attorneys flanking him, dressed in black tie as if the last 3 weeks had not occurred, as if the federal charges and the arraignment date and the Tribune story that had run in 4 additional publications were simply things that were happening to the background of his life rather than to its center. He was 61, heavy through the shoulders, with the face of a man who had spent 4 decades being listened to and had made that into a physical quality, the face of someone who expects the room to configure itself around his presence. And even now, even with everything that had happened, the room was still doing it. Not fully, not the way it used to, but still, a little. The residue of power is a long time clearing. He saw Amara. She had positioned herself near the east wall, visible, not hidden, because she'd known he would come. Reyes had told her, and the interim board had told her, and she'd understood intuitively that a man like Richard Hale would not cede the ballroom of the institution he'd controlled for a decade without standing in it one more time, without making the statement that his presence in it constituted. She'd known that, and she'd decided to be visible rather than not, because invisibility had been her survival strategy for 3 years, and she was done surviving. He crossed the room. He was slower than she expected, not uncertain. She didn't think Richard Hale did uncertain, any more than a large machine does uncertain, but deliberate, measured. The walk of someone who understands that this crossing is being watched and has decided what it will communicate. He stopped in front of her, close enough to be a choice. His attorneys maintained a discreet distance that they'd clearly been instructed to maintain. He looked at her the way powerful men sometimes look at the people who have cost them something, not with hatred, because hatred would imply she was his equal in a dimension he didn't recognize as relevant, and not with contempt, because contempt requires a kind of emotional engagement he wasn't going to give her. He looked at her with the specific, cold calculation of an assessment. "You're very young," he said. His voice was exactly what she'd expected. Low, measured, the voice of someone who had learned to use quietness as a form of dominance. "Yes," she said, "you don't understand yet what you've set in motion." "I understand exactly what I've set in motion." She kept her voice level. Her hands were loose at her sides. Her heart rate was elevated, and she knew it, and she let it be elevated because adrenaline, properly directed, was a tool, and she had spent the last week learning to direct things. "I've set in motion a federal investigation into 7 years of financial fraud, witness intimidation, and the systematic removal of scholarship students whose presence inconvenienced you. I've set in motion the independent administration of a fund you were stealing from, and I've set in motion a process by which Destiny Williams and 4 other students who were removed from this institution under false pretenses will receive official acknowledgement of what was done to them. She paused. I think I understand it pretty well. Something shifted in his face, very small, the kind of shift you could miss if you weren't watching for it. She was watching for it. A girl from the East Side, he said. The words were not loud. They didn't need to be. They were the kind of words that had worked for 61 years. A scholarship student. You think this is over because you made a phone call and gave a statement? He almost smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a glacier. I have been managing situations like this since before you were born. This isn't a situation, she said. This is a consequence. His almost smile stopped. You've been managing situations for 61 years, she said. You're right. You're very good at it. You manage Dr. Ellison. You manage the board. You manage the Academy's administration and its legal counsel and its scholarship review committee. She held his eyes. You didn't manage the documentation. You didn't manage Carla Reyes, and you didn't manage me. A pause. You barely saw me. That was your mistake. He looked at her for a long time. The ballroom moved around them. The string quartet had started somewhere near the front, a sound that was entirely the wrong register for this conversation, civilized and graceful while they stood in the space between them that was neither. What do you want? He said. The question of a negotiator, the only language he ultimately had. I already have it, she said. That's the part you're still not understanding. She looked at him steadily. I don't want anything from you. I don't need anything from you. You have been the most significant obstacle in my life for 3 years, and you are now a federal defendant. And I am going to stand in the December research panel and defend work that you tried to prevent me from doing. She breathed, steady. What I want has nothing to do with you. It never did. You just kept putting yourself in the way of it. Richard Hale looked at her with the face of a man encountering, at 61 years old, a type of person he had not previously had accurate models for. Not defiance. He knew defiance. Not anger. He knew anger. Something else. Something that his entire professional architecture was not built to process, because the thing he was encountering was not directed at him, was not about him, was simply continuing past him, through him, in a direction he could neither block nor redirect. He straightened his jacket. He looked at the room. He walked away. She watched him go. She felt the space he left behind the way you feel a pressure change. The air was different in his absence, lighter by some quality she couldn't quantify but could absolutely feel. She breathed. At 9:30, she found Damien near the ballroom's side exit, looking out through the glass doors at the Academy's courtyard, which was lit from below with the small ground lights that lined the paths, the stone of the buildings very dark against the November sky. She stood beside him, and they were both quiet for a moment, watching the courtyard. He spoke to you, Damien said. Yes. And? She thought about how to answer that. He's going to spend years not understanding what happened, not understanding how someone like me could have been the variable that broke something he'd built so carefully. She looked at the courtyard. That's its own punishment, not the legal one. The one where you're 61 years old and you've spent your life building things, and the thing that undoes you is someone you never bothered to actually see. Damien was quiet for a moment. Is that satisfying? Not the way I thought it would be. She looked at the sky above the courtyard. I thought I wanted him to understand what he cost, what he took from those students. She paused. But he can't understand it. He doesn't have the architecture for it. And being angry at someone for lacking something they were never built with. She stopped. That's just carrying it. I've been carrying enough. He looked at her. In the dim light from the courtyard, she could see him clearly, and she thought about the 11-year-old boy with broken fingers and the 52-year-old man who had walked through a hallway full of laughing teenagers and draped his coat over her shoulders with the quiet, unhurried care of someone performing an act that needed no audience. What happens now? She said. For you. I have matters in other places that have been waiting. He said it simply. My being here has been not exactly what I planned for when I began looking into Hale's business interests. You planned to find financial fraud. Yes. You didn't plan to find me. No. He held her gaze. I didn't. She nodded. She looked at the courtyard. The scholarships. The independent fund. Already structured, Gloria Chen has the documentation. Reyes's office has oversight. He paused. 5 initial endowments, 1 for each student whose non-renewal we can document as fraudulent, plus ongoing annual awards, merit-based, administered by an independent committee with no board interference. He looked at the glass doors. Destiny Williams has been contacted. She's finishing a degree at a state school. The endowment doesn't undo what happened to her, but it covers the rest of her education and then some. Amara was quiet for a moment. She thought about a girl she'd known briefly 3 years ago, in the early days when Blackwood had still felt like a place she might eventually belong. A girl who'd filed a complaint and disappeared into the administrative apparatus and been explained away with the language of regrettable and procedural. "Thank you," she said. I know it's not charity. I know it's a correction. You told me." She looked at him. "I'm thanking you anyway. I'm allowed to thank you." He accepted this with a slight dip of his chin. The expression on his face did the thing it sometimes did, shifted in the way of someone deciding how much of what they're feeling to make visible, and this time he let more of it be visible than usual. Something that was not quite warmth and not quite pride, and was something more specific than either. "You are going to be extraordinary," he said. Not a prediction, a fact, delivered in the same register as 2 + 2 = 4. Not because of any of this. Because of what you are under all of this. That was there before I walked into that hallway. She looked at him. "You sound very certain." "I am certain." He said it without apology. "I am very good at reading the quality of people. It is perhaps the most reliable skill I have developed in 53 years. A pause. "You are going to do work that matters. You are going to be someone who changes what is possible for the people who come after you. And you are going to do it while remaining exactly who you are, which is the hardest part of any of it." She looked at him for a long time. Outside, the courtyard was still and cold, the ground lights making small, warm circles on the stone paths, the November sky above it complete and dark and very large. "Are you leaving?" she said. "Tomorrow morning." She nodded. She had known this. She'd known it since the cafe on Harmon Street, since the moment she'd understood that Damien Volkov was not someone who stayed in one place for long, not because he was rootless, but because his roots were of a kind that didn't require him to stand still to maintain them. "I have a question," she said, "and I want you to answer it honestly." "I always answer you honestly," he said. "That's not a thing I've done consistently in my life, and I want you to know I'm aware of that distinction." She believed him. "What are you?" "Exactly. Not the search results, not the alleged and the rumored. What are you?" He was quiet for a moment. She watched him decide. "I am a man who built things in the spaces that existed between laws," he said, "in places where laws were either absent or available to whoever paid for them. I built those things because that was the environment I survived, and because I was very good at it." He held her eyes. "Some of what I built hurt people. I'm not going to tell you otherwise, and I'm not going to give you a ledger that balances it. I've done things that don't balance." He paused. "I've also spent the last 12 years trying to do things that don't require me to look at a wall I can't walk back from. That's not redemption. I don't believe in the architecture of that word. It's just trying to be a different kind of accurate about what I'm building." She listened to all of it. She didn't look away. "Okay," she said. "Okay. You asked me to answer you honestly. You did. I'm receiving it." She looked at the courtyard one more time. "You put your coat on my shoulders in a hallway full of people who were laughing at me. Whatever you are, that's also what you are." He said nothing, but the expression on his face did the thing one more time, and this time she read it clearly. A man who has been many things, accurately recognizing that someone has seen him accurately in return, and finding in that recognition something he hadn't expected to find. She held out her hand. He looked at it for a fraction of a second, then shook it. His hand was the hand of someone who had worked with it once, and it was warm, and the handshake was firm and brief and said several things without words the way good handshakes do. "Take care of your research," he said. "Take care of yourself," she said. She walked back into the ballroom. The string quartet was playing something she didn't recognize, and the room was still full of people navigating the unfamiliar territory of an institution in the process of becoming something different from what it had been, and the chandeliers were very bright, and she walked through all of it with her notebook and her small bag and her green dress and her hands steady at her sides. She stopped at the edge of the room. She took her phone out. She called her mother. It rang twice. "Baby." Her mother's voice carrying the particular alertness of a woman who has been following news coverage all day and has spent several hours deciding whether to call or to wait. "I saw the story. I saw your name in the story. Are you—" "I'm fine, Mama." She stood at the edge of the ballroom of Blackwood Academy, beneath its chandeliers and its portraits, and she felt the truth of the word fine in a way she hadn't felt it when she'd said it before. Not the compressed defensive fine of someone managing more than they're admitting. Just fine. Actually. "I'm really fine." Her mother made a sound that was not words and didn't need to be. "I want to come home this weekend," Amar said. "If that's okay. If that's—" Her mother's voice caught and steadied. "Baby, of course that's okay. I'll make your food." "Make your food," Amar said. "I'll eat mine." Her mother laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and genuine, and Amara stood in the ballroom and held the phone against her ear and let the sound of it fill the space that the last week had left behind. She didn't stay at the gala long after that. She said goodnight to Gloria Chen, who shook her hand with both hands and said, "The December panel is confirmed and I'll be there in the audience," and she collected her coat from the cloakroom and walked out through the main entrance hall. She stopped once under the portrait of the founder. The old man in the dark coat, one hand on a desk, built to outlast everything. She looked at him for a moment. Then she walked out through the iron gates of Blackwood Academy into the cold November night, and the city opened up around her, wide and dark and full of noise and possibility, and the ordinary ongoing fact of people who had no idea what had happened inside that building today, living their lives in all directions. And she stood on the sidewalk for a moment and breathed the cold air in through her nose and out through her mouth. And she was 19 years old and tired and hungry, and her research panel was in December, and the Independent Scholarship Fund had 5 names in it, and Destiny Williams was going to be able to finish her degree. And none of that was clean or simple or without cost, and all of it was real. She started walking, not back toward the academy, not toward the scholarship dormitory and its narrow bed and its water-stained ceiling, forward into the city in the direction of the east side, where her mother lived 2 floors up in an apartment with a kitchen table, where a woman had once cried over a scholarship letter, and where Amara was going to sit this weekend and eat her mother's food and tell her, not everything, not yet, but more than fine, more than the compressed and managed version, the real version, the version that had cost something and produced something and was not over but was different now, fundamentally and irrevocably, from what it had been a week ago. She walked for a long time before she got on the bus. And above the city, the November sky was very dark and very large, and below it the lights of everything, all the ordinary, ongoing everything, made their small, persistent argument against the dark. And Amara Brooks rode the bus home through the middle of all of it, her notebook in her lap, her hands finally still.